My name is Bessie, and at 58, I've always prided myself on being a reliable grandmother to my 7-year-old grandson, Mason. I work as a hospital administrator in suburban Chicago, juggling a demanding career while still making time for family. I never expected that on a routine Tuesday, I'd discover my husband of 35 years dancing with his mistress in a restaurant parking lot, causing me to be late picking up Mason. But what truly broke my heart was my son Michael's reaction. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I finally silenced my ungrateful son, who yelled at me without knowing the full heartbreaking story behind my tardiness. I grew up in a close-knit middle-class family in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. My parents taught high school, instilling in me the values of education, responsibility, and family loyalty. I met Frank during my sophomore year at Northwestern University, where I was studying healthcare administration, and he was pursuing business. We connected at a campus fundraiser, bonding over our shared love of classic movies and ambitious career goals. Frank had an easy charm and quiet confidence that drew me to him. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was dependable and kind. After graduation, we married in a modest ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. We built our lives methodically, buying a starter home in the suburbs, advancing in our careers, and planning for a family. Our son Michael arrived after 3 years of marriage. From the moment he was born, I felt a fierce love and protective instinct that reshaped my entire world. Frank was a proud father, but remained somewhat detached from the daily challenges of parenting. He was building his career at an investment firm, often working late and traveling for business. This established a pattern that would continue throughout our marriage, Frank as the provider, me as the nurturer, balancing work and family. I returned to my healthcare career when Michael was 6 months old, working my way up to become an administrator at Lakeside Memorial Hospital. It wasn't easy juggling professional responsibilities with motherhood, but I found fulfillment in both roles. Frank and I settled into a comfortable routine that served us well for many years, even if passion gradually gave way to companionship. Michael grew into a bright, ambitious young man who seemed to inherit Frank's drive and my sense of responsibility. He excelled academically, earning a scholarship to the University of Chicago and later attending Northwestern Law School. We were immensely proud when he joined Preston Wainwright & Associates, one of Chicago's prestigious law firms specializing in corporate law. In his late 20s, Michael met Tara, a marketing executive with a major retail company. They married after 2 years of dating and soon after welcomed Mason into the world. I'll never forget holding my grandson for the first time, feeling that same rush of love I'd experienced with Michael. Mason had his father's sharp eyes and his mother's expressive smile. From that day forward, he became the center of our family universe. As Mason grew, it became apparent that both Michael and Tara had demanding careers that often required late hours and occasional weekend work. Without being asked, I offered to help with childcare. What began as occasional babysitting evolved into a regular schedule. I would pick Mason up from Lakeside Elementary on Tuesdays and Thursdays, keeping him until Michael or Tara finished work. These afternoons with Mason became the highlight of my week. We developed special rituals, stopping for ice cream on Tuesdays, visiting the library on Thursdays. Mason would chatter about school friends and his latest obsessions, whether dinosaur space or superheroes. I treasured these glimpses into his developing mind and personality, so reminiscent of Michael at that age, but uniquely his own. Over the past couple of years, Michael's work stress had increased noticeably. He'd been assigned to major corporate clients with high stakes and tight deadlines. His natural intensity sharpened into something harder: impatience, irritability, and a tendency to snap at small inconveniences. Tara once confided that he brought work home most evenings, often retreating to his home office until late at night. I recognized the pattern from Frank's early career and worried about the toll it might take on their family. Meanwhile, my own marriage had settled into a comfortable, if somewhat predictable, routine. Frank and I had our separate interests: his golf and business associations, my book club, and hospital committee work. We still enjoyed our weekend breakfast together and occasional dinners out, But something had shifted subtly in recent months. Frank had begun paying more attention to his appearance, buying new clothes, getting more frequent haircuts, even joining a gym. At first, I was pleased, assuming he was addressing the health concerns his doctor had raised at his last physical. But then came the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences, the vague explanations about working late that didn't quite add up. I noticed these changes but pushed aside my suspicions. After 35 years of marriage, I didn't want to accuse Frank without evidence. Perhaps he was planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. Maybe he was dealing with a sensitive work issue he couldn't discuss. I chose to trust rather than confront, focusing instead on maintaining family harmony. At the hospital, I managed a staff of 35 across several departments, making critical decisions daily that impacted patient care and operational efficiency. My colleagues respected my judgment and leadership. It was a stark contrast to home, where I sometimes felt my contributions were taken for granted. Michael would call with schedule changes at the last minute, expecting me to accommodate without question. Frank would assume dinner would be handled, groceries stocked, household appointments managed. Still, I took pride in being the family linchpin, the one everyone could count on in any situation. I'd never missed a day picking up Mason. I'd never forgotten an important family occasion. I'd never let personal feelings interfere with family responsibilities. Until that Tuesday in April, when everything changed. The morning began like any other Tuesday. I woke at 6 to find Frank's side of the bed empty. A note on the kitchen counter said he'd gone to the gym before work, something that had become his routine in recent months. I prepared for my day, reviewing notes for an important budget meeting while drinking my coffee. The spring sun streamed through the kitchen windows as I gathered my things, a sense of optimism coloring the morning, despite the nagging concerns about Frank that I continued to push aside. The forecast promised mild temperatures, perfect for taking Mason to the park after school, as I sometimes did before dropping him at Michael and Tara's house. My workday at Lakeside Memorial was particularly challenging. 2 nurses had called in sick, creating staffing issues in the cardiac unit. The quarterly budget review revealed concerning trends in supply costs. A minor water leak in the outpatient clinic required immediate attention to prevent disruption of services. I moved between meetings and crises with practiced efficiency, the familiar rhythm of problem-solving keeping me centered. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, reminder to pick up Mason at 4:30. I have an important client meeting at 5:30. Can't be late for this one." I texted back immediately. "Of course, I'll be there on time as always." His response came quickly. "Thanks. This meeting could mean a partnership track if it goes well." I smiled at the phone, understanding the pressure he felt. Michael had been working toward partnership for years, putting in long hours and sacrificing family time. I remembered similar periods in my own career, the stress of proving oneself while balancing family needs. By 3 o'clock, I had resolved the day's major issues and decided to leave early. This would give me time to run a few errands before picking up Mason. First stop was the pharmacy to refill Mason's allergy medication. The spring pollen had been triggering mild symptoms that Tara was concerned about. After the pharmacy, I realized I had nearly an hour before school pickup. Riverdale Plaza was on the way to Mason's school, and I decided to treat myself to a coffee at the little cafe there. It had been a stressful day, and a moment of quiet reflection with a good latte seemed the perfect mini-break. I pulled into the shopping center, noticing how busy it was for a Tuesday afternoon. Finding a parking spot near the coffee shop, I gathered my purse and stepped out into the pleasant spring air. As I walked toward the cafe, something caught my eye in the adjacent restaurant parking lot. A car that looked remarkably like Frank's dark blue Lexus. My steps slowed. Frank should be at work miles away in downtown Chicago. Perhaps it was just a similar model. But as I drew closer, I could see the Northwestern alumni sticker on the back window and the small dent on the passenger door from a parking mishap last month. It was definitely Frank's car. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. Perhaps he was having a business lunch. But why here, so far from his office, And why hadn't he mentioned it? An uncomfortable feeling settled in my stomach as I changed direction, moving closer to the restaurant, an upscale Italian place called Bella Notte. The restaurant had large windows facing the side garden patio. Without fully admitting to myself what I was doing, I circled around, staying partially hidden behind decorative shrubs. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Frank was probably just having lunch with a colleague. There was surely an innocent explanation. Then I saw them through the window. Frank was at a corner table, not with business associates, but with a single woman. Even from a distance, I recognized Sarah Jensen, his administrative assistant. She was in her late 30s, attractive in a polished way, with sleek blonde hair, and always impeccably dressed. She had been to our home for the company Christmas dinner last year. What struck me first wasn't their presence together, but their body language. Frank was leaning toward her, his hand covering hers on the table, his expression more animated than I'd seen in years. Sarah was laughing at something he said, tucking her hair behind her ear, with her free hand, in a gesture that seemed intimate and practiced. I ducked behind a pillar, my heart pounding. I should leave, I thought. I should walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I shifted position slightly to keep watching, needing confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. The waiter cleared their plates, and Frank said something to him. Moments later, soft music began playing in the restaurant's patio area. To my astonishment, Frank stood and extended his hand to Sarah. She took it with a smile, and they moved to a small open area near their table. Frank took her in his arms, and they began dancing, not in a formal way, but with the easy familiarity of a couple who had danced together many times before. I watched my husband of 35 years hold another woman closest cheek against her hair, swaying to music I couldn't hear. The intimacy of the moment was unmistakable. This was not a first dalliance, but an established relationship. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My vision blurred, whether from tears or shock I couldn't tell. Stumbling backward, I made my way to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to process what I'd seen. Once inside, I sat gripping the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. My mind raced with questions and realizations. How long had this been happening? Was this why he'd been so distant? Were there signs I'd missed or ignored? Memories flooded back. Late nights at the office weekend golf games that ran longer than usual, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness, the secretive phone calls. The pattern was so obvious now that I felt foolish for not recognizing it sooner. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the devastation of betrayal. The happy life, I thought we had the partnership I believed in, despite its routines and predictability. It was all built on lies. The future I had imagined for our retirement years evaporated in an instant. A car horn from somewhere in the parking lot startled me back to the present moment. I glanced at the dashboard clock and felt a jolt of panic. 4:25 p.m. Mason's school was 20 minutes away in good traffic. I was going to be late. With trembling hands, I started the car and pulled out of the parking space. My mind was split between the crushing weight of what I'd just discovered and the immediate need to reach Mason. I wiped tears from my eyes, trying to focus on driving safely despite my emotional turmoil. "Get it together, Bessie," I said aloud to myself. "Mason needs you right now. Everything else can wait." But as I merged onto the main road, I realized that compartmentalizing this betrayal wouldn't be as simple as I hoped. My hands shook on the steering wheel. My vision blurred periodically with fresh tears. The life I thought I knew had just shattered, and I was expected to carry on as if nothing had happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the reliable one, the family member everyone could count on no matter what. Now, on the one day when personal crisis might justify being late, I knew Michael would be unforgiving. His important meeting wouldn't wait for his mother's marital crisis. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself enough to drive safely to Mason's school. I was already going to be late, but I needed to get there as quickly as possible without endangering myself or others on the road. Little did I know, the discovery of Frank's infidelity was only the beginning of this terrible day. I wiped tears from my eyes as I navigated through the afternoon traffic, trying to focus on the road rather than the image of Frank dancing with Sarah that kept replaying in my mind. The digital clock on my dashboard showed 4:40 p.m. I was already 10 minutes late for Mason, something that had never happened before. I pressed the hands-free button on my steering wheel to call Michael and explain, but the call went straight to voicemail. Of course, he would be preparing for his important meeting. "Michael, it's Mom," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm running a bit late for Mason. I'll be there as soon as—" My message was cut short by the sudden swerve of a delivery truck into my lane. The driver had been checking his side mirror and hadn't seen me in his blind spot. I reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel to the right to avoid a collision. My car veered onto the shoulder tires, screeching against the pavement. I tried to correct my steering, but momentum carried me forward until my front bumper struck the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal and breaking plastic. The impact wasn't severe. The airbags didn't deploy, but the shock of it sent a jolt through my body. For several seconds, I sat, frozen hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my chest. The truck had continued on, the driver apparently unaware of what had happened. "Are you okay, lady?" A man's voice broke through my daze. A construction worker from a nearby site was running toward my car, concern etched on his face. I did a quick mental inventory of my body. My neck felt stiff and my wrists ached from gripping the steering wheel, but there was no serious pain. "I think so," I answered, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "That truck cut you off something awful," the man said, reaching my window. "You're lucky you didn't flip over the rail. Want me to call an ambulance?" "No ambulance," I said quickly, thinking of Mason waiting at school. "But I should report the accident." The construction worker nodded. "Already called 911. Highway Patrol should be here soon. You should stay put until they check you out." I glanced at the clock again. 4:45 p.m. now. Panic rose in my throat. "I need to make a call. My grandson is waiting at school." I tried Michael's number again, then Tara's. Both went to voicemail. I left messages explaining the situation, but had no way of knowing if they received them. Next, I called Mason's school, relieved when the secretary answered. "This is Bessie Thompson, Mason Crawford's grandmother," I explained. "I've been in a minor accident and will be late picking him up. Could you please make sure he knows I'm coming?" "Of course, Mrs. Thompson," the secretary replied kindly. "Don't worry about Mason. He can wait in the office with me. Just take care of yourself." That small kindness nearly broke me. After the emotional devastation of discovering Frank's affair and now the accident, the secretary's simple compassion brought fresh tears to my eyes. By the time the Highway Patrol arrived at 5:00 p.m., I was increasingly anxious about Mason. The officer, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense manner, approached my window. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Ramirez. Are you injured?" "No, just shaken up," I replied. "But I need to pick up my grandson. He's waiting at school." Officer Ramirez nodded sympathetically, but remained firm. "I understand, but we need to complete an accident report. It shouldn't take long." Long is relative when you're worried about a 7-year-old waiting alone at school. The officer methodically examined my car, took photographs of the damage and the scene, and checked my license and registration. She asked detailed questions about what had happened, nodding as I described the truck cutting into my lane. "Without witnesses or a license plate from the truck, this will likely be documented as a single vehicle accident," she explained as she filled out forms on her tablet. "Your insurance should cover the damages since you swerved to avoid a collision." I nodded impatiently, checking the time again. 5:30 p.m. now. Michael would be in his meeting, possibly unaware of my messages. Mason had been waiting an hour. "Is there anything else you need from me?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "My grandson has been waiting for an hour." Officer Ramirez finally looked up from her tablet. "Just need your signature, Mrs. Thompson. Then you're free to go." She passed me the tablet and stylus. "Your car seems drivable, but take it slow. And you might want to get checked out by a doctor, even if you feel fine now. Accidents can cause delayed symptoms." I signed quickly and thanked her, already starting my engine before she had fully stepped away from the car. The front bumper was damaged and hanging slightly askew, but the car seemed to drive normally as I pulled carefully back onto the road. The school was eerily quiet when I arrived at 5:45 p.m., the playground empty and most of the lights off. I parked in front of the main entrance and rushed inside, finding my way to the office where a light still glowed. Mason sat at a small table coloring intently in a superhero book. The secretary looked up as I entered, relief evident on her face. "Grandma!" Mason exclaimed, jumping up and running to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, his familiar weight and warmth bringing the first comfort I'd felt in hours. "I'm so sorry I'm late, sweetie," I said, kneeling to hug him properly. "I had a little accident with my car." His eyes widened with concern. "Are you hurt? Like when I fell off the swing?" "No, nothing like that," I assured him, touched by his concern. "Just a bump to my car, but I'm sorry it made me late." The secretary gathered Mason's backpack and lunchbox. "He's been wonderful company," she said kindly. "We had cookies and milk while we waited." I thanked her profusely, feeling guilty for the inconvenience, but grateful for her understanding. Mason chattered happily as we walked to my car, apparently unbothered by the extended wait. His resilience made the knot in my stomach tighten further when I thought about Michael's likely reaction. "Whoa, your car got a big owie," Mason exclaimed when he saw the damaged bumper. "It did," I agreed, helping him into his booster seat. "But it can still get us to your house." As we drove the 15 minutes to Michael and Tara's home, I tried to prepare myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Michael would be furious about the delay, especially if it had affected his important meeting. Under normal circumstances, I would be apologetic and accommodating. But today had been anything but normal, and I found a strange new resolve hardening within me. Mason filled the drive with stories about his day at school and questions about my car owie, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing in both his father and grandmother. I answered him as normally as possible, pushing aside thoughts of Frank and Sarah, focusing instead on getting through the next difficult conversation. When we pulled into Michael and Tara's driveway, I could see Michael's car already there. He must have rushed home after his meeting, probably frantic when he couldn't reach Mason or me. The porch light cast harsh shadows across the manicured lawn as we approached the front door. Before I could even turn off the engine, the front door flew open. Michael stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The confrontation I'd been dreading was about to begin, and I suddenly felt too emotionally depleted to face it. But face it, I must. For Mason's sake, if nothing else. The front door flung open before I could even unbuckle Mason from his car seat. Michael stormed down the driveway, his face flushed with anger, tie loosened at his neck as if he'd been pulling at it in frustration. He didn't even glance at my obviously damaged car. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, voice rising. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" I opened my mouth to explain, but Michael wasn't interested in explanations. "You're late to pick up your grandson," he continued, gesturing wildly. "Mason was waiting at school for over an hour. What kind of grandmother does that?" Each word felt like a physical blow after everything I'd endured that afternoon. I focused on unbuckling Mason, who had gone quiet, his earlier cheerfulness evaporating in the face of his father's anger. "Daddy," Mason tried to interject, tugging at Michael's suit jacket. "Grandma had a car accident." Michael barely glanced down at him. "Not now, Mason." Then turning back to me. I had to leave my meeting early. Do you understand how important this client is? This could have been my path to partnership. Neighbors were beginning to take notice of the commotion. Across the street, the Johnsons paused while walking their dog. Next door, Mrs. Patel stepped onto her porch, pretending to check her plants, while watching the uncomfortable scene unfold. I took a deep breath. Michael, if you would just listen for a moment. Listen to what? More excuses? He interrupted, his voice sharp enough to make Mason flinch beside me. I've been calling for hours. You couldn't even answer your phone. Tara appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Unlike Michael, she seemed to notice the damaged state of my car. She stepped onto the porch, but didn't intervene in her husband's tirade. I bet you were just shopping or getting your hair done. Michael continued his assumption, striking a particularly painful chord, given what I had actually discovered during my unexpected stop. Completely lost track of time while my son sat alone at school. Mason tugged at my hand. It's okay, Grandma, he whispered, trying to comfort me even as tears welled in his eyes at his father's behavior. Michael's next words were the final straw. Dad would never be this irresponsible. He always says you lose track of what matters. The irony of invoking Frank's supposed responsibility in this moment was too much. A surge of emotion, grief, betrayal, anger, rose within me, threatening to spill over in ways I might regret. For a moment, I considered telling Michael exactly what his father had been doing that afternoon, how I had watched Frank dancing with his mistress while Michael's precious father-knows-best world crumbled around me. But Mason's presence stopped me. This innocent child didn't deserve to have his grandfather's betrayal broadcast in the middle of a driveway dispute. Whatever happened between Frank and me, however, Michael and I resolved this conflict. Mason needed to be protected from the adult complications swirling around him. Instead, I reached into my purse with steady hands and pulled out the accident report Officer Ramirez had given me. I held it toward Michael without a word. I was in a car accident, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The police report is in my purse. That's why I was late. That's why I couldn't answer my phone. Michael stared at the paper, momentarily silenced. His eyes flicked to my car, really seeing the damaged bumper for the first time. Something flickered across his face, perhaps the first hint of doubt about his assumptions, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. Fine, whatever, he muttered, taking Mason's hand. Come on, buddy, let's get you inside for dinner. Tara stepped forward. Bessie, are you okay? Do you need anything? Before I could answer, Michael called from the doorway. She's fine. She said so herself. Tara gave me an apologetic look, but followed her husband inside, closing the door behind them. I was left standing alone in the driveway, the accident report still in my hand, feeling as if I'd been hit by something far more damaging than a guardrail. The drive home was a blur. My emotions swung wildly between hurt at Michael's treatment, anger at Frank's betrayal, and worry about what would happen next. My phone buzzed with a text from Tara. I'm sorry about Michael. He was worried. Too little, too late. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark and empty. No Frank. No explanation. Just silence and the weight of everything that had happened. I examined my car in the garage light. The bumper hung awkwardly, and there were scrapes along the passenger side where I'd scraped the guardrail. Like my marriage, it was damaged but still functioning, at least on the surface. Inside, I moved through the familiar rooms, feeling like a stranger. Family photos on the walls seemed to mock me, smiling faces preserving moments of happiness that now felt counterfeit. Had Frank been seeing Sarah even then? When had our marriage become a convenient fiction rather than a genuine partnership? Around 9 o'clock, I heard Frank's key in the door. He entered whistling, carrying a bag of takeout food. His face registered surprise at seeing me sitting in the darkened living room. Hey, I thought you'd be in bed by now, he said casually. Brought some Thai food if you're hungry. I'm not hungry. I replied flatly. If he noticed my red-rimmed eyes or subdued manner, he gave no indication. Instead, he launched into an elaborate lie about working late on a difficult client project. Each fabricated detail twisted the knife deeper. Sounds challenging, I managed to say, unable to confront him yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand my options before blowing up our lives. Frank retreated to the kitchen with his takeout, apparently relieved that I hadn't questioned his story. I remained in the living room, my mind racing. I couldn't stay in this house tonight, couldn't sleep beside him knowing what I knew. But I also couldn't leave without a plan. Once Frank had gone upstairs to shower, I slipped into the home office and turned on the computer. If Frank had been careless enough to meet Sarah in a public restaurant, what other mistakes might he have made? Sure enough, a search through our financial records revealed a credit card I didn't recognize. A personal account Frank had apparently opened without my knowledge. The statements told their own story: hotel charges, jewelry purchases, expensive restaurants, months of them dating back nearly a year. This wasn't a recent infatuation. It was a full-blown affair conducted right under my nose while I maintained our home, supported our son, cared for our grandson, and managed a demanding career. I photographed the statements with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original place. Next, I located our most important financial documents: property deeds, investment accounts, insurance policies, and took pictures of those as well. If this situation was heading where I feared it might, I needed to protect myself. By midnight, exhaustion overwhelmed me. I made up the guest room bed and left a note on our bedroom door, claiming a migraine needed silence and darkness. It wasn't far from the truth. My head pounded with stress and emotional trauma, but it was merely a stopgap measure. Tomorrow would require decisions and actions I wasn't yet prepared to face. As I finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, one thought provided a strange comfort. At least I hadn't revealed Frank's betrayal during Michael's outburst. Whatever happened next, I had protected Mason from that painful knowledge. Some family bonds at least remained sacred to me. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as I woke in the guest room. For a blissful moment, I couldn't remember why I wasn't in my own bed. Then yesterday's events came rushing back. Frank dancing with Sarah, the accident, Michael's cruel words. The emotional weight returned instantly, pressing against my chest like a physical burden. I lay still, listening to the sounds of Frank moving around the house. The shower running, cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, the front door closing as he left, presumably for work, or perhaps to see Sarah again. I checked the time, 7:15 a.m. Early, but not too early for what I needed to do. I reached for my phone and called Gloria Stevenson. Gloria had been my friend since college and had become one of Chicago's most respected divorce attorneys. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was Gloria. "Bessie." Her voice was surprised but warm. "Everything okay? You never call this early?" "Not really," I admitted, my voice catching. "I need to see you, professionally." There was a brief pause. "Come to my office at 8:30, she said, understanding immediately. "I'll clear my morning." After a quick shower and change of clothes, I drove my damaged car to Gloria's downtown office, parking in the underground garage to avoid being seen by anyone who might know Frank. Her assistant led me straight in without waiting another sign of Gloria's concern. Gloria stood as I entered, her keen eyes taking in my exhausted appearance. Instead of sitting behind her imposing desk, she guided me to a comfortable seating area by the window. "Tell me everything," she said simply. For the next hour, I poured out the whole story, discovering Frank with Sarah, the accident, Michael's behavior, and finding the secret credit card statements. Gloria listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly maintaining eye contact, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "First things first," she said when I finished. "This isn't your fault, Bessie. Not Frank's affair, not the accident, not Michael's unreasonable reaction." The simple statement of support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Second," Gloria continued, "we need to protect you legally and financially before confronting Frank." I've seen too many spouses empty accounts and hide assets once they realize the game is up. She outlined a strategic approach document, everything secure copies of all financial records, open separate accounts, and prepare for various scenarios Frank might pursue once confronted. What about the house? I asked, thinking of the home we'd shared for 28 years. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, Gloria explained. The court would aim for fair division of marital assets, not necessarily equal. Your contributions as primary caregiver to Michael while maintaining a career would be considered, especially given the length of the marriage. We spent the next hour reviewing practical steps. Gloria connected me with a financial advisor specializing in divorce cases and recommended a therapist who could help with the emotional aspects. She also suggested I document any interactions with Michael regarding yesterday's incident. His behavior reveals a disturbing pattern, she noted. Automatically taking Frank's side, dismissing your explanations, public humiliation. These are learned behaviors possibly modeled on his father's treatment of you. I hadn't considered that connection, but it made painful sense. Had Michael been absorbing Frank's subtle undermining for years? The thought added another layer of heartache to an already overwhelming situation. When I left Gloria's office just before 11, I felt simultaneously drained and strengthened. I had a plan, professional support, and a clearer understanding of my options. The next step was returning to work where I could maintain normalcy while beginning to implement Gloria's recommendations. At Lakeside Memorial, I slipped into my office through a side entrance, hoping to avoid colleagues until I could compose myself. No such luck. Denise Parker, the HR director and my closest work friend, spotted me immediately. "Bessie," she called, then stopped short when she saw my face. "My office. Now." Once behind closed doors, Denise's professional demeanor gave way to friendly concern. "What happened? You look like you've been through hell." Something about her direct approach broke through my carefully maintained facade. The whole story came tumbling out again, this time with the tears and anger I'd suppressed with Gloria in favor of strategic planning. Denise listened occasionally, cursing under her breath at particularly painful details. When I finished, she reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. "You know you can stay with me if you need to, right? My guest room is yours for as long as necessary." The offer touched me deeply. "Thank you. I might take you up on that." "And that son of yours?" Denise continued, indignation coloring her voice. "Treating you that way after everything you've done for him and Mason. Somebody needs to adjust his attitude." Despite everything, I found myself defending Michael. He didn't know about Frank. He was worried about Mason and his meeting. "Stop making excuses for him," Denise said firmly. "He's a grown man who verbally attacked his mother in public without bothering to ask what happened. That's not okay, Frank's affair or no Frank's affair." She was right, of course. I'd spent decades making excuses for the men in my family. Frank's emotional distance, Michael's entitled behavior. Perhaps it was time to expect better from both of them. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and administrative tasks. I functioned on autopilot, making decisions and solving problems with practiced efficiency, while my personal life remained in shambles. The professional competence I'd developed over decades carried me through, though several colleagues commented that I seemed unusually quiet. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mason asked about you. You're still picking him up Thursday. No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior. Just a practical question about childcare." I stared at the message, emotions churning. Part of me wanted to refuse to make Michael scramble for alternative arrangements the way I was scrambling to rearrange my entire life. But that would punish Mason for his father's behavior. "Yes," I replied simply. "We'll pick him up at 4:30. Minutes later, my phone rang with a call from Mason's school. My heart raced. Had something happened to him, Mrs. Thompson? "This is Ms. Collins, Mason's school counselor." "Is Mason all right?" I asked immediately. "He's fine physically," she assured me. "But he was upset during our group session today. He mentioned being worried about you because of a car accident. He also said there was a lot of yelling afterward that scared him. My heart sank. Of course, Mason had been affected by Michael's outburst. Children absorb everything, even when adults think they're not paying attention. I suggested he draw his feelings, Ms. Collins continued. He drew a picture of you looking sad with a broken car and himself standing between two angry adults. I thought you should know. I thanked her for calling, promising to speak with Mason about his concerns. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, fighting back fresh tears. In all the personal drama, I hadn't fully considered how Mason might be processing yesterday's events. By the time I left work, I had formulated a plan. I would maintain normal routines for Mason's sake, while putting Gloria's legal and financial recommendations into action. I would arrange a special outing with Mason to reassure him, and I would prepare myself for difficult conversations with both Frank and Michael, conversations that were long overdue. As I drove home in my damaged car, I reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. My marriage, which I had believed solid if imperfect, was revealed as a facade. My relationship with my son was strained by his disrespect and my resentment. Even my relationship with Mason had been complicated by adult conflicts he couldn't possibly understand. Yet amid all this upheaval, I felt an unexpected emotion emerging: determination. For too long, I had accepted less than I deserved from the people closest to me. Whether my marriage could be saved remained to be seen, but my self-respect was non-negotiable from this point forward. Thursday morning dawned with a clarity that surprised me after 2 nights of restless sleep. I had spent Wednesday implementing Gloria's recommendations, opening a separate bank account, securing copies of important documents, and meeting with the financial advisor she'd recommended. Frank remained oblivious, continuing his pattern of vague explanations about late work hours that I now recognized as transparent lies. I had decided not to confront him yet following Gloria's advice to secure my position first. Each time he casually mentioned work challenges or upcoming business trips, I nodded and responded appropriately while documenting his statements. The private investigator Gloria had connected me with would begin tracking Frank's movements tomorrow, gathering evidence I might need if the divorce became contentious. At work, I maintained my professional demeanor despite the emotional turmoil beneath the surface. Years of balancing personal and professional demands had prepared me well for compartmentalizing. Only Denise knew the full situation, providing silent support in meetings and checking in privately throughout the day. By 3 o'clock, I was preparing to leave early for Mason's pickup. I had arranged to take him to Palmer Park before bringing him home, hoping to have a gentle conversation about the events of Tuesday. My rental car, arranged through insurance while my damaged car awaited repair, felt foreign beneath my hands as I navigated the familiar route to Lakeside Elementary. I arrived 20 minutes early, parking in the visitor's lot and walking toward the playground where I could see children beginning to gather for dismissal. Several parents nodded in greeting, familiar with me as Mason's grandmother. Ms. Collins, the school counselor, approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Thompson, good to see you," she said. "Mason had a better day today. He mentioned you were picking him up, which seemed to reassure him." "Thank you for calling yesterday," I replied sincerely. "It helped me understand what he might be feeling." Children often process family tensions in ways adults don't anticipate, Ms. Collins observed. They're remarkably perceptive, but don't always have the vocabulary to express their concerns. Her words resonated with my own childhood experiences. I remembered sensing tension between my parents long before they ever argued openly, picking up on subtle cues neither realized they were projecting. When the dismissal bell rang, I positioned myself where Mason could easily spot me. His face lit up when he saw me, and he ran across the playground with his backpack bouncing against his small frame. "Grandma," he called, throwing his arms around my waist in a tight hug. "You got a new car already." "It's just a rental while mine gets fixed," I explained, smoothing his tousled hair. "How would you like to go to the park before we head to your house? I brought a snack." "Yes." Mason pumped his fist enthusiastically. "Can we feed the ducks too?" "Absolutely." I agreed, grateful for his quick return to childish enthusiasm after Tuesday's trauma. Palmer Park was quiet on Thursday afternoons, with only a few mothers and young children occupying the playground. Mason and I walked to his favorite spot by the small pond, where a family of ducks regularly patrolled for handouts from visitors. I spread a small blanket on a bench and unpacked the snacks I'd brought: apple slices, cheese cubes, and the oatmeal cookies Mason loved. As we tossed small pieces of grapes to the eager ducks, I gently approached the subject weighing on my mind. Mason, Ms. Collins mentioned you were worried about my accident. I wanted to make sure you know I'm okay. Mason nodded seriously, his eyes on the ducks. Your car got hurt, but you didn't. That's good. Yes, that's exactly right, I confirmed. Sometimes accidents happen, but the important thing is that everyone is safe. He was quiet for a moment, then asked with the direct simplicity only children can manage. Why was Daddy so mad at you? He was really loud. The question pierced my heart. I chose my words carefully, wanting to be honest without undermining Mason's relationship with his father. Your daddy was worried about you waiting at school, I explained. When adults are very worried, sometimes they get upset in ways that aren't helpful. Mason considered this, his small brow furrowed in concentration. He yelled really loud. It scared me. I know, sweetie, it wasn't nice to yell like that. You didn't yell back, he observed, even when Daddy said mean things. His perception stunned me. At 7 years old, Mason had recognized the power imbalance in that interaction, noticed my restraint in the face of Michael's anger. Sometimes, I said carefully, when someone is very upset, yelling back just makes things worse. Grown-ups should try to listen and understand before getting angry. Mason nodded sagely. That's what Ms. Collins says too. Use your words, not your angry voice. I smiled at the simple wisdom. Ms. Collins is very smart. Daddy said he was sorry later, Mason added, surprising me. He told Mommy he shouldn't have yelled at Grandma. So Michael had recognized his behavior was inappropriate even if he hadn't apologized directly to me. It was a small comfort, but significant. We spent another hour at the park, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Mason's science project about butterflies, a new superhero movie he wanted to see, a playdate scheduled with his best friend Zach. By the time we packed up to leave, his earlier solemnity had given way to typical 7-year-old exuberance. When we arrived at Michael and Tara's house, I was surprised to see Michael's car in the driveway. He rarely worked from home, typically staying at his firm's downtown office until early evening. Mason bounded up the front steps and opened the door without knocking, calling out as he entered. Dad, I'm home. Grandma and I fed the ducks. I followed more slowly, steeling myself for whatever interaction might follow. Michael appeared in the hallway, his expression guarded. He wore casual clothes rather than his usual suit, another unusual sign for a Thursday afternoon. Mason, go wash up and get your homework started, he directed. I need to talk to Grandma for a minute. Mason looked between us uncertainly, perhaps remembering Tuesday's confrontation. I gave him a reassuring smile. It's okay, sweetie. I'll come say goodbye before I leave. Once Mason had disappeared upstairs, Michael gestured toward the kitchen. Can we talk? The kitchen was quiet and spotless, Tara's organized nature evident in the labeled containers and color-coded calendar on the refrigerator. Michael motioned for me to sit at the island, while he remained standing, shifting his weight uncomfortably. I've been thinking about Tuesday. He began his lawyer's precision with words evident even in this personal conversation. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did before getting the full story. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. I remained silent, waiting. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it sent a pang through me. The police report. I didn't realize you'd actually been in an accident. I jumped to conclusions. Yes, you did, I agreed quietly, without giving me a chance to explain. I was worried about Mason, he said defensively, then caught himself. But that's not an excuse for yelling at you in the driveway. I apologize for that. The words seemed to cost him considerable effort, which spoke volumes about our relationship. When had it become so difficult for my son to apologize to me? When had he started seeing me as an employee who had failed at a task, rather than his mother who deserved respect? Apology accepted, I said, deciding to meet his effort halfway. But Michael, there's a pattern here that concerns me. This isn't the first time you've dismissed my perspective or spoken to me disrespectfully. His posture stiffened slightly. That's not fair. I've always respected you. Respect isn't just words, Michael. It's actions. It's listening before judging. It's considering that the woman who raised you might have valid reasons for her behavior. He looked away, uncomfortable with the directness of my assessment. Before he could respond, my phone rang. Frank's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call, but the moment had created an opening I hadn't anticipated. Dad calling to check on you. Michael asked, his tone suggesting this was further evidence of Frank's supposed attentiveness compared to my irresponsibility. Something inside me snapped. The accumulated stress of the past few days, the weight of deception I'd been carrying, the injustice of Michael's continued idealization of Frank, it all converged in a moment of raw honesty. No, Michael. Your father is calling with another lie about working late. He's been having an affair with his assistant Sarah for at least a year. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. Michael's face drained of color as he stared at me in disbelief. That's not possible. Dad wouldn't. I saw them together on Tuesday. I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. That's why I was late picking up Mason. I stopped for coffee and saw your father's car at Bella Notte. He was dancing with Sarah in the restaurant. Michael sank onto a stool, his expression shifting from shock to denial. There must be some explanation. A business lunch, maybe? I found the credit card statements, Michael. Hotel rooms. Jewelry. Almost a year of deception. I hadn't meant to have this conversation yet, certainly not with Michael before confronting Frank. But now that it had started, I couldn't stop. While you were accusing me of being irresponsible, your father was betraying both of us. The kitchen door swung open and Tara appeared, freezing when she sensed the tension in the room. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. My father is having an affair, Michael said flatly, the words seemingly strange in his mouth. Mom just told me. Tara's eyes widened, then filled with compassion as she looked at me. Unlike Michael's disbelief, her expression suggested she found the revelation sadly plausible. Bessie, I'm so sorry, she said, moving to sit beside me at the island. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone rang again. Frank persistent in his attempt to reach me. This time, I answered and put it on speaker. Bessie, where are you? Frank's voice filled the kitchen. I thought we could get dinner tonight. I'll be working late, but I could meet you around 8. The familiar lie spoken so casually landed differently with an audience. Michael's face tightened as he heard his father's deception firsthand. I'm at Michael and Tara's, I replied calmly. I picked up Mason as planned. Oh. Frank sounded momentarily thrown. Well, don't wait up then. The Peterson account is a mess, might be midnight before I wrap up. The Peterson account, I repeated, watching Michael's expression grow darker. Or perhaps drinks at the Lakeshore Hotel with Sarah, that seems to be your Thursday pattern based on the credit card statements. Silence stretched across the line. Then Frank's voice suddenly cautious. Bessie, what are you talking about? I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Frank. We'll discuss it when I get home. I ended the call without waiting for his response. The kitchen remained silent for several long moments. Michael stared at the counter, his world view visibly reshaping itself. Tara reached across to squeeze my hand in silent support. I need to go, I said finally. I have a conversation waiting at home. Michael looked up, his expression conflicted. Mom, wait. Are you going to be okay? The question held genuine concern beneath the awkwardness. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the sensitive boy who had once brought me dandelions to make you happy when you looked tired. I've been making my own way since long before you were born, Michael, I said, softening my tone. I'll be fine, but thank you for asking. I stood to leave, then paused. I'd like you to think about something. The way you spoke to me on Tuesday, the assumptions, the public humiliation. It reminded me of how your father has sometimes treated me. Patterns repeat unless we consciously break them. His eyes widened slightly at the comparison. Before he could respond, I continued. I need to say goodbye to Mason. We'll talk more later. As I climbed the stairs to Mason's room, I felt a strange lightness despite the difficult conversations ahead. Truth, even painful truth, brought its own relief after too much deception. Whatever happened next with Frank, whatever evolved in my relationship with Michael, I was reclaiming my voice after years of accommodation and compromise. Mason looked up from his homework when I entered his room, his innocent smile a reminder of what truly mattered amid all this adult complexity. Are you leaving, Grandma? Yes, sweetie. I have some important things to take care of at home. He nodded seriously, then added with unexpected perceptiveness. Daddy's not mad anymore. He was sorry he yelled. I know, I assured him, kissing the top of his head. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. As I drove home, preparing to confront the biggest betrayal of my life, I found myself thinking of Mason's simple observation. You didn't yell back. Perhaps there was wisdom there beyond his years, not in silent acceptance of mistreatment, but in the power of measured response in the face of others' emotional storms. Frank's car was already in the garage when I arrived home. The confrontation I'd been avoiding was now unavoidable, but for the first time in days, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Our house stood quiet and imposing as I pulled into the driveway, the familiar structure suddenly feeling like an elaborate stage set rather than a home. Lights glowed softly behind closed curtains, suggesting Frank waited inside. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my purse and briefcase, but my resolve remained strong. I found Frank in the living room, pacing nervously between the fireplace and the sofa. He turned when I entered, his expression a carefully composed mask of confusion. Bessie. He began, his tone somewhere between conciliatory and defensive. We need to talk about that strange phone call earlier. I set my things down deliberately and met his gaze. Yes, Frank, we certainly do. I don't know what you think you saw or what statements you're referring to, he continued, but there's been some misunderstanding. Sarah is just my assistant. We occasionally have working lunches to discuss client matters. The practiced ease of his denial confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't the first time he'd constructed such explanations. Perhaps he'd used similar justifications with Sarah about our marriage, casting our relationship as loveless or troubled to justify his infidelity. Working lunches don't typically involve dancing, I replied calmly, or hotel rooms at the lakeshore every Thursday for the past 6 months. Color drained from his face. You've been spying on me, checking my personal accounts. The immediate shift to offense rather than addressing the accusation itself was telling. No, Frank. I saw you with her on Tuesday at Bella Notte. The credit card statements were simply confirmation of what I witnessed with my own eyes. He sank onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of Michael's earlier distress. For a moment, he seemed to consider continued denial, then his shoulders slumped in defeat. It wasn't planned, he offered weakly. It just happened. Affairs don't just happen, Frank. They involve thousands of deliberate choices and lies. My voice remained steady despite the pain lancing through me. How long He stared at the carpet. A little over a year. The confirmation hit hard despite my preparation. A year of deception while we shared meals, attended family gatherings, made plans for upcoming holidays. A year of intimacy built on fiction. Why? The question emerged before I could stop it, though. Gloria had warned me that asking often led to more pain rather than closure. Frank gestured vaguely. We fell into a routine, Bessie. The same conversations, the same schedule, year after year. Sarah is younger, more exciting, more attentive to your needs, I supplied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Different, he finished lamely. It wasn't about you. You've been a good wife, a good mother. The patronizing praise stung worse than criticism might have. A good wife who deserved betrayal rather than honest conversation about his dissatisfaction. A good mother who was publicly berated by the son we had raised together. If you were unhappy, you could have said something, I pointed out. We could have tried counseling, made changes, or even separated honorably. Instead, you chose deception. Frank looked up, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. As if you would have been open to hearing that I wanted more passion, more spontaneity. You've been content with our arrangement for years. Our arrangement, I repeated, incredulous. Is that how you view our 35-year marriage? An arrangement that you're free to supplement when convenient? He stood abruptly, pacing again. This isn't productive, Bessie. What matters now is how we move forward. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. A year-long affair isn't a mistake, Frank. It's a deliberate choice made day after day. I took a deep breath, centering myself. And you're right about one thing. What matters now is how we move forward. Separately. He stopped pacing, turning to stare at me. What are you saying? I'm saying our marriage is over. I've consulted an attorney. I'll be staying with Denise until we can make more permanent arrangements. Panic flashed across his face. Not at losing me, I realized, but at losing control of the situation. Don't be hasty. We should discuss this rationally. There are financial considerations, family implications. What would Michael think? Michael already knows. I informed him. I told him this afternoon. You told our son before talking to me. His voice rose indignantly. That was inappropriate, Bessie. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. More inappropriate than having an affair with your assistant, more inappropriate than lying to your wife for a year. Frank's response was cut short by his phone buzzing. He glanced at it reflexively, then quickly turned it face down on the coffee table. Too late. I had glimpsed Sarah's name on the screen. Go ahead, I said with remarkable calm. Answer it. Tell Sarah that your wife knows everything and that your son knows everything. Tell her you've been caught and the convenient double life you've been enjoying has just collapsed. It's not like that, he protested, but the buzzing had already stopped. It's exactly like that, I countered. And now you have choices to make, just as I've made mine. I stood and retrieved a small suitcase I'd packed earlier that day, hidden in the guest room closet. I'll be at Denise's tonight. Tomorrow I'll come by when you're at work to collect more of my things. My attorney will be in touch about next steps. Frank stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The Bessie he knew, the accommodating wife, the peacekeeper, the woman who absorbed small slights and disappointments without complaint, had been replaced by someone who demanded respect and honesty. You're really leaving just like that? His tone suggested he'd expected tears, pleading perhaps an opportunity to negotiate a return to the status quo with promises of change. Yes, Frank, just like that. I picked up my suitcase and purse. For what it's worth, I hope you and Sarah will be very happy together, though I suspect her interest may wane once you're actually available. As I walked toward the door, Frank called after me, his voice suddenly uncertain. What about the Peterson account? The presentation is next week, and I've mentioned your formatting skills to the team. The absurdity of his concern, worrying about work presentations while our 35-year marriage disintegrated, almost made me laugh. Almost. I'm sure Sarah can handle it, I replied without turning. She seems very skilled at handling your affairs. I closed the door behind me with quiet finality, got into my rental car, and drove away from the house where I had lived for nearly 3 decades. Tears threatened, but didn't fall. There would be time for grief later. For now, I needed clarity and resolve to navigate the challenging days ahead. Denise was waiting on her porch when I arrived, a glass of wine already poured for each of us. Her guest room was prepared with fresh linens and small touches of comfort. A vase of daisies, a stack of novels on the nightstand, a soft throw blanket across the foot of the bed. "How did it go?" she asked after I'd settled in, both of us sitting in her comfortable sunroom with our wine. "About as expected," I replied. Denial, then confession, then attempts to minimize. He seemed more concerned about the practical inconveniences of our separation than the emotional impact of his betrayal. Denise nodded. "Classic. My ex was the same way. Worried about who would handle the lawn service when I moved out, as if that were the pressing issue." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the evening breeze rustling through the open windows. Finally, Denise asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. "Are you okay?" "Really?" I considered the question carefully, evaluating my emotional state beneath the shock and determination that had carried me through the day. "Not yet," I admitted. "But I will be. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm making choices rather than just responding to circumstances created by others." Denise raised her glass in a small toast. "To choices, then, and to friends who have guest rooms when those choices require temporary housing." I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "To friends. I don't know what I'd do without you." Later, lying in the unfamiliar bed, I found myself thinking not of Frank, but of Michael and Mason. How would this family earthquake affect them? Would Michael's idealized image of his father crumble entirely? Or would he find ways to rationalize Frank's behavior? Would Mason somehow blame himself, as children often do, when adult relationships fracture around them? I made a mental note to speak with Miss Collins about resources for Mason if he showed signs of distress. Whatever happened between Frank and me, between Michael and his father Mason, deserved protection from adult complications and reassurance that he was loved unconditionally. My phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting Frank, I was surprised to see Michael's name instead. "Mom, I owe you a better apology than I gave today. Can we talk tomorrow? Just the two of us?" The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not from sadness, but from a tentative hope that something positive might emerge from this painful upheaval. Perhaps Michael was beginning to see patterns in his own behavior that needed addressing. "Yes," I replied simply. "I'd like that." As I drifted towards sleep, I felt the first stirrings of something unexpected amid the grief and uncertainty. A quiet confidence that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them on my own terms. The woman who had driven away from her marriage tonight was stronger than the woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal just 2 days earlier. And she was only beginning to discover her resilience. 2 months later, I stood in my new apartment, arranging framed photos on a bookshelf that had been delivered that morning. The space was smaller than the house I had shared with Frank, but it felt more genuinely mine. Decorated according to my preferences without compromise, organized to suit my routines rather than accommodating someone else's. The divorce proceedings were moving forward with surprising civility. Frank, after his initial shock at my decisive departure, had become almost eager to resolve matters quickly. Gloria suspected Sarah had delivered an ultimatum once she realized Frank was actually available, demanding the security of marriage rather than continuing as the secret girlfriend. The thought amused me more than it hurt now. We had agreed to sell the house and divide the proceeds along with our other assets in a fairly equitable arrangement. Frank hadn't fought for more than his share, perhaps recognizing that a contentious divorce would reflect poorly on him professionally once the reason became known. I had been fair in my requests, wanting clean closure rather than punitive measures. My relationship with Michael had undergone the most remarkable transformation. Our conversation the day after I left Frank had begun awkwardly, but evolved into the most honest exchange we'd had in years. Michael had apologized properly for his behavior on the day of the accident, acknowledging that his stress about work had spilled over inappropriately. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted during that conversation. "About patterns repeating. The way Dad sometimes dismissed your contributions or made decisions without consulting you. I've caught myself doing similar things with Tara." His self-awareness had surprised and touched me. We had talked for hours that day, exploring family dynamics I had normalized for too long, and Michael had unconsciously absorbed. He shared his own confusion and anger about Frank's betrayal, his struggle to reconcile the father he'd admired with the man who had lied so convincingly for so long. In the weeks that followed, Michael had begun therapy, something he would have dismissed as unnecessary before this family earthquake. Tara later told me he was making real efforts to manage his stress differently, to listen more attentively, to appreciate rather than expect her support. Mason had adjusted to the new family configuration with the remarkable resilience of children. Frank maintained regular visits with him, though I noticed Mason sometimes returned from these outings with a pensive expression that concerned me. During one of our special park afternoons, he had asked, with characteristic directness, "Why does Grandpa live with Ms. Sarah now, instead of you?" I had explained in age-appropriate terms that sometimes grown-ups decide they can't live together anymore, but that both still loved him very much. He had considered this seriously before announcing, "I like your new apartment better anyway. It has the cool dinosaur books." My professional life had flourished amid the personal changes. Released from the constant low-grade stress of maintaining a facade at home, I found new energy for innovative projects at Lakeside Memorial. The hospital CEO had recently approached me about a promotion to Senior Director of Operations, a position that would involve more responsibility but also greater influence over patient care policies that had long concerned me. Frank had reached out several times since our separation, his tone shifting from defensive to regretful as the reality of our divorce proceedings progressed. Last week, he had called with news that surprised me less than it seemed to surprise him. Sarah had ended their relationship, accepting a position at a competing firm across town. "I made a terrible mistake, Bessie," he had said, his voice heavy with belated realization. "I threw away 35 years for something that wasn't real." "It was real, Frank," I had replied without malice. "It just wasn't worth what you sacrificed for it." He had asked tentatively if there was any chance of reconciliation. The question didn't anger me as it might have weeks earlier. Instead, I felt a calm certainty in my response. "No, Frank. Too much has broken between us, but I hope you find happiness. I truly do." And I meant it. The anger had gradually subsided, replaced by a kind of detached compassion. Frank had made choices that cost him dearly. His marriage, his son's unqualified respect, his self-image as an honorable man. Living with those consequences seemed punishment enough without my continued resentment. My doorbell rang, interrupting my arrangement of the bookshelf. Michael, Tara, and Mason stood in the hallway, carrying a housewarming gift and a homemade cake decorated with wobbly frosting flowers that clearly showed Mason's artistic contribution. "We come bearing sugar and kitchen gadgets," Tara announced with a warm smile. "Essential supplies for any new home." Mason rushed forward for a hug. "We're going to have a special dinner here tonight. Dad's cooking he practiced all week." Michael shrugged self-consciously as he entered. "Don't get too excited. It's just pasta, but I did make the sauce from scratch." The casual mention of Michael cooking, something he had rarely done before considering it Tara's domain despite her full-time career, highlighted how much had changed in our family dynamics. He moved comfortably into my kitchen, unpacking grocery bags he'd brought and beginning to organize ingredients with unexpected competence. "Need any help?" I offered, watching him with undisguised surprise. "Nope. This is your housewarming. You sit and be warmed, or whatever the appropriate verb is. He grinned, a flash of the boyish charm he had inherited from Frank, but was making uniquely his own in healthier ways. Tara linked her arm through mine, leading me to the living room, while Mason explored the apartment with the boundless curiosity of childhood. "He's been taking cooking classes," she confided quietly. "Says it's not fair that I work as many hours as he does, but still handled most of the meal preparation. He's actually getting quite good." "Wonders never cease," I murmured, genuinely touched by this tangible evidence of Michael's efforts to change ingrained patterns. "The therapist has been a game changer," Tara continued. "He's more present, more aware of how his stress affects us. Not perfect, but trying. Really trying." We settled on my new sofa, watching Michael move efficiently between counter and stove, while Mason appointed himself official taste tester. The scene filled me with unexpected contentment. Not the life I had planned, but somehow richer and more authentic than the carefully maintained facade of before. Later, as we enjoyed the surprisingly delicious pasta, Michael had indeed practiced judging by the perfectly balanced flavors. Mason asked innocently, "Grandma, are you happier now in your new house?" The question created one of those moments of sudden silence that occur when a child inadvertently touches on a complex adult truth. Michael and Tara exchanged glances, clearly unsure how I would respond. I considered the question seriously, respecting Mason's perceptiveness. "Yes, Mason, I am happier now. Sometimes difficult changes lead to better situations, even when they hurt at first." He nodded sagely. "Like when I fell off my bike and got stitches but then learned to ride without training wheels after." "Exactly like that," I agreed, touched by his simple wisdom. After dinner, as Michael and Mason tackled dishes together, another new development, Tara helped me finish arranging my new living room. She paused, holding a framed photo from Michael's law school graduation. "I've been meaning to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For showing us another way forward. When all this happened with Frank, you could have just accepted it or become bitter. Instead, you respected yourself enough to demand better. It's been instructive." I hadn't considered my actions as modeling behavior for the next generation of our family, but Tara's words made me realize the unintended positive influence of my choices. "We're planning a vacation next month," Tara continued, setting the photo on the shelf. "The three of us and you, if you'd like to come. A beach house on Lake Michigan. Mason's been begging to build sandcastles with you." The invitation, so natural and inclusive, warmed me deeply. "I'd love that." When they left that evening, Michael hugged me tightly at the door. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered. I should have said that sooner. Alone in my new apartment, I moved through the rooms, appreciating the peace and order I had created from chaos. The pain of betrayal remained a scar rather than an open wound now. But alongside it had grown something unexpected, a profound appreciation for my own resilience and capacity for renewal. The woman who had once defined herself primarily as Frank's wife and Michael's mother had rediscovered Bessie, the individual with her own preferences, ambitions, and boundaries. The hospital administrator respected for her competence, the friend valued for her loyalty and wisdom, the grandmother delighting in Mason's developing personality. All facets of a whole person who had perhaps been partially obscured within the comfortable constraints of a long marriage. As I prepared for bed in my new home, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 2 months, triggered by a moment of devastating discovery in a restaurant parking lot. Frank's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I had, but from those fragments had emerged a more authentic existence, painful in its creation, but increasingly satisfying in its reality. The accident that had once seemed the worst part of that terrible day now appeared almost providential, the physical manifestation of the emotional collision already underway in my life. And Michael's angry words, hurtful as they were, had ultimately opened a door to honest communication that might otherwise have remained closed. Sometimes, the most painful moments contain the seeds of necessary growth. Sometimes, being forced to stand up for yourself against those you love most creates the foundation for healthier relationships. And sometimes, as I had learned at 58, life's most meaningful chapters can begin when you least expect them, emerging from the ashes of what you thought was the established story of your life. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love who treated you unfairly or judged you without knowing the full story? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and demand respect in your relationships. Sometimes doing so can transform family dynamics in surprising ways. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe.